Coming up this week on the show, we've got an interview with Patrick, one of the developers of Bitrig. We're going to find out all the details of their OpenBSD fork, what makes it different, what their plans are going forward. We also got this week's news and answers to your emails, so stay tuned right now to BSD Now, the place to be. SD. BSD Now, episode 67. It must be rigged. Recorded December 10th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jew.
We're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got another exciting show, this on the eve of Christmas coming up in a couple weeks. So happy holidays to everyone again. But we do have some cool news today and a neat interview to look forward to. So we'll hop right into it. And kind of tying into our interview is our opening story about Bitrig 1.0 being released. So if you haven't heard of this, by the way, Bitrig, which when I first heard that, I thought like Bitcoin mining for some reason.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
Right? I imagine a lot of you guys are going to be thinking the same thing. But it's not. It's not for Bitcoin mining. This is a fork of OpenBSD that started a couple years ago. And we have an interview where we'll talk about that a little later. But according to their FAQ, they have some different design goals, only supporting modern hardware and a very limited set of CPU architectures.
Right, so they're paring down all the stuff that OpenBSD supports. You know,
Sure.
They're like, well, there's all these older platforms, and it requires a bunch of work to keep them working, and nobody uses them.
Yeah, so they don't focus on that
the
so much.
OpenBSD people are very proud that they can still run on a VAX.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not so useful.
I mean, it's neat to see these guys, NetBSD in particular, running on some really old, esoteric hardware.
Right, with stuff where there is no other operating system you can get for it.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
yeah, it's not for mainstream a project like this. So also, it looks like they replaced nearly all the GNU tools in base with BSD versions, and they're also another goal is to have better virtualization support.
Right, so they have Clang to compile the base system instead of GCC. And they have the full C++ compatibility and ABI and so on. So they replaced standard C++ with libc++ from Clang. They upgraded to UFS2 as the default file system with journaling. Although I don't know if that's the same journaling that's FFS2 with a journal. I don't know if it's the same as our UFS2 with soft journaling, but
yeah, I'm not sure.
They've also replaced their MFS driver with TempFS, and they apparently have snapshots with TempFS RD.
Oh, interesting.
To make RAM disks.
That's cool.
Yeah, that is interesting. They now have unlimited size BSD.RAM disk that they use with the new TempFS RD driver. I guess before they were fixed size. More thread local storage, support for UUIDs and xlocals and libc. And a big one there is the GPT partition storage. They have a new fdisk-like tool, and you can actually create GPT partitions. OpenBSD is not bothered. They decided they didn't really want to deal with GPT yet.
Do they have some work, since I'm not an OpenBSD guy, do they have some other method for doing the larger size disks?
They have some kind of hack to be able to go over 2 terabytes on disk, but since, most times it's like routers and firewalls or laptops, there's not that many people that have large disks yet. So
you wait a couple years, you'll get that 4 terabyte disk on your laptop. It's going to happen.
They also have good support for ARM, including with the hardware floating point stuff and the ARM v7. Fair kernel mutexes, improved PS tool, and apparently they only have one GNU tool left in the base, is TexInfo.
Oh, okay.
And then they...
Looks like a single snapshot target for SRC and Zenukara.
Yeah, so those are they do all their development in Git, and everything's up on GitHub.
Woohoo! Yes. Props to them for that. That makes me excited.
It's quite a break from OpenBSD and still using CVS. And most importantly, they have a hacker-style console with green text on a black background.
See, I don't know why more BSDs haven't done that. Like
I always thought
that just seems
OpenBSD
cool,
was cool with its white on blue. I like blue.
right? We need the hacker style with green on black by default. That way we'll get into the movies. You know, when somebody's going to launch the nuclear missiles or whatever, they'll be like, "Oh, that's OpenBSD."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's
They
cool.
also have
But
a
yeah,
thread up on Hacker News where they answered a bunch of people's questions. And like we mentioned later in today's episode, we actually have an interview with one of the developers to answer more questions.
cool. Okay, so you'll have to stay tuned for that little tease. You see, you got to stick around. Okay, well, next up in the news, we have a neat article over at Tech News World about is it time to try BSD? And we get a little peek. You'll want to go take a look at this into the Linux world's mindset about how more and more people are considering switching. And this is a little bit more of a mainstream tech news site, so the fact that this is even coming up is pretty cool. But they said people are starting to get more suspicious of systemd, and a lot of the drama in the Linux world is leading to a whole new group of potential users over on the BSD side, which I think we can personally vouch for
Yes,
that,
we've
Alan. That's what
seen many.
a lot of the stories we
Yeah.
hear. A lot of people switching because of systemd or various drama over there.
Mm-hmm.
So the article kind of explores some of the pros and cons of switching and features opinions of various users. So it's a pretty fascinating read. But I think my biggest takeaway from this, Alan, isn't what's in the article. It's the fact that there even is an article.
Yeah.
Like how many years have people been saying, "Oh, BSD is dying," BSD in general,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden now it's like, "Oh, maybe we should be thinking about switching."
Yeah.
Like we kind of went from that to
But
this.
the article starts with
something
the quote there saying, most people's reasons that they don't like systemd are imagined or potential or what might happen,
Sure,
not what actually has happened, and so on.
sure.
But yeah, so it definitely is interesting to see.
Hey, perception is
Yeah,
reality.
exactly.
So
It's definitely been interesting to see that more and more people getting interested in BSD, and a lot of people who just wouldn't have given it a chance before are actually just taking a look at it now and realizing that it's nothing to do with the reason they left Linux. It's that they're drawn to BSD because of its own reasons.
yep. Very cool. So again, fascinating read. Go take a look if you're curious to see what some folks are talking about there on reasons why they may consider switching or won't consider switching yet. I think one of the people said something about they wanted to be able to run VMware as opposed to VirtualBox. So that was a big one for one particular user, but we'll see. Maybe that'll happen someday. You never know. Okay, so next up in the news, Poudriere, which is a FreeBSD tool for those who don't know, for
Yes.
building packages,
It is
concurrent parallel builds.
yeah. Basically, it uses jails to build multiple packages concurrently. So
Yep.
the old system they had was based on look at all the packages we have to build, which is about 24,000 packages, and then we'll try to build the dependency trees for them, and then we'll build some on this machine and some on this machine and some on this machine, and it spent a lot of time and effort trying to avoid building things twice and dealing with it, and
Yep.
it was slow. It took many days to build all the packages. Then somebody had the bright idea. It's like, well, newer servers have many cores, like 24, 48, or 96 cores. What if we just started a jail, one for each core, and then just build one package on one CPU on each core, right? Because you can use make -j8 or whatever to try and make it use 8 threads, but it's never going to keep all 8 of them saturated all the time. So
And a
instead,
lot of the ports don't even support that.
exactly, and half the time spent doing other stuff that's not compiling. So instead, let's have one jail for each CPU core and build 24 packages at once, as often as possible. And so it has that and a bunch of other features and makes extensive use of ZFS. So, and kind of through this, we've also gained a lot of other features that have been added to the ports tree, like staging support and so on. And
Yeah,
these are based on the idea that to make sure the package is built correctly, you start with an empty jail that has nothing in it. Then you install the dependencies, which you've compiled previously as their own packages. So you install those as packages, and then you build the port.
Yep.
And so that way everything is exactly how it's supposed to be. And if something breaks, you know that the port needs fixing, and it didn't only work because it happened on the package builder that dependency that wasn't declared happened to also be installed or whatever.
Yeah, if a library or file goes missing
Yeah,
or something,
or the
that
wrong
it
version.
depends
It doesn't link against the wrong version of something because it was already there or anything like that. But yeah, it's very, very good. And it also has turned out to be a very good stress test on servers because, compiling 24 packages at once while they're all doing different things really beats on the server. They have a new feature called Atomic Package Repository, which will actually avoid touching the repository during the build, allowing it to continue to be served. Like on mine, for a long time, I just served the directory straight out of the Poudriere data set. And so that meant while I was compiling new packages, I couldn't install any because everything was all out of whack. So they have a new Atomic Package Repository mode, which will build into a temporary directory and only copy it over if it's successful, which is quite good.
Just changes the link. Yeah, we turn that off because we rsync stuff out of the build server to a staging area where we then can install stuff from the staging box. But so they recommend you turn that off if you're going to be doing like rsyncs and stuff. But that's up to you.
And they have commit packages on failure, which can be set to no to only publish the build packages if no failures were encountered. Right on the next bulk run, the packages staged from the previous one will be reused if not published. So this is if there were any build failures, don't push anything. So if you have
I
a
need to
whole
look
set
into that.
that are important,
I would like a modified version of that where I can say these are the essential packages because I usually build the entire port tree, right? So it'd be kind of cool to have a feature that says these packages are essential. As long as these built, go ahead and publish it. Otherwise.
Well, the other one you
off.
might be interested in is keep old packages. When it's set to
Oh,
yes, it will keep up to keep old packages count number of repositories in symlink directories. The top level files will be symlinked to .latest from the current repository, and this can be used to allow rollbacks. So
nice.
Won't store the same package twice, but if there is an upgrade, you'll keep the current version and the one older version or 5 older versions or whatever, so that people can roll back if they need to.
That sounds like it probably uses the atomic package repository features.
I'm not sure. That one's probably separate. Well, because it's
that is cool,
keeping multiple. But yeah, the bulk mode now supports a dry run mode, especially for that atomic package repository is required because it just builds to the temporary directory and then throws it away. Timestamp logs can be set to yes to add a timestamp to every port build in line in the log file, which makes the log files very verbose but easier to grok. They also have allow make job packages can be set to a list of package names that can be run with make jobs. So for example, normally you run one package in each jail and you don't do the make -j, but you can actually now set it to a list of packages where you do want to do that. It's very useful for my build because I build everything in like 20 minutes and then I spend 45 minutes building Java in one jail. So if I added Java there, if Java supports make jobs, I think it does, I could build Java a lot quicker.
Yeah, well then you'll probably be interested in the other priority boost option too, where you can bump up certain things. Like we mark, I think Apache OpenOffice and LibreOffice and some of those guys as please build these first, and that way they're done by the time the rest of the process is finishing up.
They've also improved the QEMU support so that you can use Poudriere to build stuff for using the native cross-build tools. So you can do, I guess, MIPS and ARM or stuff that people are working on with that. They also learned the new -I for interactive, which basically drops shell kind of like the test port option so that you can actually see what's going on when something isn't working. And also the queue is now prioritized based on the depth of the dependency chain for each package rather than its direct dependencies. So ports can now be boosted by adding their package name to the priority boost variable. So you can say, oh, OpenOffice has the most dependencies, so let's start getting those dependencies built first because I need those to start building OpenOffice, and that's going to take a long time. Let that run in one of the jails while I'm building everything else instead of having it as an outlier way at the end. Or I need this package to build first, or if this package isn't going to work, we're not going to publish the set. So let's get it building as quickly as possible and waste as little effort as possible.
Cool.
They've also got some improvements for the way you build the jails. You can use
new flags they supported.
you can a new pre-set up CH root to be used as the jail, so you can provide an already built one if you're doing something strange.
Fancy.
And you can also have it use an existing source tree with a pre-built corresponding user object tree instead of having to
rebuild again.
Check out the source and build it for you. You can say it's already built. Just do a make install world from this directory. And you can also provide it a tarball, which is that contains a source tree, so that you can easily use Poudriere to build unofficial versions of FreeBSD or packages for unofficial versions and so on.
Yeah, that's nice.
They've also improved the status commands and the all the website stuff that Poudriere does. I've not played much with the
Hmm.
website stuff, but it's apparently very powerful, especially when you're doing a longer
Yeah,
build.
we use the website stuff extensively, and it's really nice for monitoring everything
Right.
that's going on and being able to view like logs and failures right there is really handy.
Right. My Poudriere instance built like 200 packages, so it only takes a couple minutes as in Java, so I
Yeah.
don't need the website. But for you, with building the whole set, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I spend a lot of my week in
You
there.
can also enable the color output or turn it off if you don't want it. So it makes the output on the console easier to see, what's
Mhm.
more important than others and so on. They also have a queue system uh, that being used with the Poudriere D backend. Commands
Mhm.
will automatically be queued if run from a non-root or if Poudriere D is already running. This is
Mhm.
still under development, though is expected to be documented and improved for 3.2. But basically, there's
Nice.
a system where you can queue up stuff or allow other people to queue up stuff, and then it'll be built, next in line kind of thing. Which I'm
Mhm.
guessing is something they're hoping to do to allow people to do, exp runs and so on against their own changes instead of having to request the port manager people do that. They also
Cool.
have hooks that can be used to automate tasks during certain parts of the build, and lots of interesting stuff there.
Yeah, definitely. There's some good improvements. So congratulations, guys, for getting that out. I know we'll be updating our system to
Yep.
it very shortly. We've been running the devel for a while, so
Yeah,
I've
you
already
already
been
have
playing
most of
with a
these
lot of these
features.
features, and
Apparently, they also have
they do
a
work.
new command, package clean, that will clean out your repository of all packages that are not needed anymore.
Yep.
So, before you could end up with old versions in there that wouldn't get erased properly, and now it can go through and delete those, which will shrink the size of your repository. And I know a couple people will be looking forward to that because, these package repositories can get, to 400 plus gigs. Saving a bit of that would be very useful.
Nice. Okay. Well, next up in our weekly news here, we have a video here about firewalling with OpenBSD's PF and PF Sync.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a YouTube video we have a link to. It's a talk by David Queen from an Australian conference that was uploaded, since I know a lot of us in North America probably didn't fly down to Australia and see that. So this is going to be helpful to check out. It's, of course, the subject matter being PF and PF Syncs. He uses PF to manage 60 internal networks with a single firewall.
That's
So
a
that's
lot
pretty
of
cool.
VLANs.
That is, it is. So he gives some background on how PF originally came to be and some of the OpenBSD 101 for the initiated, which is a great way to get your feet wet here. He also touches on some of the different rule sets, use cases, config syntax, placing limits on connections, OSPF, OffPF, segregating VLANs, sync proxy handling, and a lot more. So a very comprehensive talk
Mm-hmm.
here. And the second half of the presentation focuses mainly on PF Sync and CARP for failover and redundancy.
Right.
So if
that,
you need high
yeah,
availability,
if you're going to be
there you
running
go.
60 internal networks, you probably don't want it to all depend on one router. So you have two or
Yeah,
three of
yeah.
them, and then PF Sync is keeping your state tables in sync. So when one goes down, you don't lose NAT translations and so on. And
Hmm.
then CARP is moving the IP that's actually being used as the default gateway via DHCP or whatever for all your machines, so that it'll keep going.
That is really cool. So with two BSD boxes running PF Sync, you can actually patch your kernel and still stay connected to IRC.
Right,
How
so
cool
that
is
you
that?
can, when it comes time to upgrade, you can upgrade one of them and reboot it, and the traffic just fails over to the second one. You can
Hmm.
even force it to do it, so you can be even cleaner. And then when it
Yep.
comes back up, you switch back over, make sure it works.
Run it for a while.
Make sure it works, and once you're confident that you're not going to have to roll back, then you can do the second one.
Yeah, that's really cool. All without losing any states. That's pretty slick.
Exactly.
Nice. Okay. Well, at this point, we're going to go ahead and go into our first sponsor mention for the week, which of course is Tarsnap. And the URL for that is tarsnap.com/BSD now. Do let them know that we sent you.
Yes.
And please don't make us plead with you guys. You need to do backups.
Yes.
You got to be doing them somewhere. And if you're going to do them somewhere, they got to be encrypted,
Mhm.
especially in any kind of offsite situation. I mean, who knows who's out there trying to request copies of data and who's actually looking at it, employees, etc.
Mhm.
But with Tarsnap, you don't have to worry about that. It's encrypted before it leaves your box, before it goes over the wire.
Exactly.
So
You don't
you don't have to trust the remote end.
exactly. Colin's not going to promise he's not going to read it because he couldn't even if he wanted to.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So again, take a look at that. That's tarsnap.com/BSD now. You can go ahead and download a client for pretty much any operating system out there, including Windows with Sigwin. So that's pretty cool. And it's got a tar-like interface. So if you know tar syntax, you're 90% of the way there. So it should be pretty easy for you to get set up. And of course, dirt cheap, as we've mentioned. You put $5 in. If you're only backing up a little bit of data, that may last you quite a while.
Exactly.
So definitely go ahead and get started with that.
You should do that, like right now.
Yes. Don't wait. Pause the show. Go do it right now. Okay, we're joined now by Patrick Wilt, who's joining us to talk about Bitrig, where he's a contributor. So, first of all, great to have you on the show this week, Patrick.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
Great. So, the same question we ask everyone: how did you first become involved in BSD? What got you to this point?
I think it started in 2008. I was just finishing school and basically looking for a job, my first ever job. So I was looking around. At that time, I was more like a Linux geek. Gentoo actually have been using that for a few years.
Sure.
And I knew exactly that I didn't want to do anything related to Microsoft, which isn't really easy here because I live in a rather rural area. So we only have small companies who basically run a few Windows servers, and that's it. So I was looking around and found a job vacancy somewhere in Munich. And it's a company that basically uses Linux as workstations and produces products based on a BSD. So for me, that was kind of the holy grail.
Okay.
So I applied, got the job, and I've been working there since then. And well, it's a heavy user of OpenBSD, so basically that's how I got to BSDs.
Okay, very cool.
Cool. So you want to tell us the story how you ended up going from that to actually being an OpenBSD developer?
That actually also kind of starts with Linux. I don't know, a few years ago, someone ported Linux to the iPhone, in particular the original iPhone and 3G. And I had an iPhone 3G, so I wanted to try it out. And basically installed it into my phone, tried it, and wanted to participate and make it better and better, and kind of joined the project and learned lots about ARM assembly, reverse engineering, and all the stuff that is needed to do that. And that's how I learned to love ARM. So a few years later, I got more involved in development in OpenBSD, like privately, and wanted to run OpenBSD on the Panda board, which was a fairly new ARM-based device. And it didn't work at that time, but Miat from OpenBSD had a patch for PMAP to work on the new architecture, and I tried that, but it didn't work either, so I debugged and debugged and debugged. And at some point, I got it running and continued to work on that project, develop drivers for peripherals and all that stuff, and kind of got an account at OpenBSD to improve the architecture at OpenBSD for even further. And well, that's how I got there.
Nice. Well, here we're here to talk about Bitrig today. So why don't you tell us, first of all, introduce us to Bitrig. What is it, and what are some of the goals of the project?
Bitrig is a fork of the OpenBSD operating system. Okay. So it inherits all the great changes, but extends it even further. So the goal is to modernize the system while applying OpenBSD's philosophy at the same time. So, like, we have a new compiler toolchain with Clang and libc++, and hopefully soon a new binutils replacement. We do some ground-laying SMP work, like interrupter threads and critical sections and that stuff. And of course, for us, in comparison to OpenBSD, it's much easier than to do because we focus on modern architectures like AMD 64 and ARM version 7.
Sure.
Instead of backs. And so, anyway, so why did you decide to do that as a fork instead of just as part of OpenBSD?
Well, first of all, I haven't been with Bitrig when that happened. I only joined a year later or so. But as far as I know, it started out as a simple patch set from Marco and Sip from the OpenBSD community or OpenBSD developers, who wanted to have Clang as compiler. And they had more ideas like wishing to clean up the stuff, like removing Apache, simplifying the sets, having much better SMP and file system support, and it kind of evolved from a simple patch set into their own project. The idea then was to cooperate with OpenBSD, but that kind of didn't work out. A bunch of OpenBSD core developers were kicked from OpenBSD. Even those that didn't actually participate in the project and only were co-workers of Marco and Sip. And well, those also wanted to continue to work on OpenBSD, but essentially got persona non grata and had no other choice really than join Bitrig, and that's how it was born.
Okay. Well, we've mentioned some of the things we've seen in like the 1.0 release notes earlier, but give us your take. What else does Bitrig offer over regular OpenBSD? What are some of the other changes you guys have made?
Well, when you try Bitrig, you really won't see a big difference. There's green or black text, there's a different name, different logo, but otherwise it feels the very same as OpenBSD. Almost all changes are more like under the hood. So it might feel a bit snappier. We support GPT partitioned hard drives, have no FS check wait times, and just simple things that you don't notice usually. We also offer a rather transparent development process. We have an IRC channel where we openly discuss all ideas we have. We have votes on things we don't unanimously agree on, and everyone who wants to can participate in that project. So I think that is what really sets us apart, that we have this transparency and the wish to modernize. And I think there's lots of more things to come, in particular SMP, but that will have to wait for the next release.
So a lot of your goal is modernizing the infrastructure and the build system so that it's easier to add more things later on and to kind of scale to the newer hardware, like you said, with the GPT partitioning table, so it's easier to support larger drives. And
yeah, but that is also kind of the future. Like, if I remember correctly, UEFI makes use of GPT, and that is basically needed for it. And that is something we also want to support.
That one's interesting. So is there a plan for having a bunch of different branches, like a stable and a current or release, or what's kind of release cycle are you planning to have?
Well, we use the JIT version control, and we have a master branch, which is basically current from OpenBSD. When we release, we tag a specific commit in Git and create a stable branch for it. So important bug fixes or other changes that are worthy of it basically head into the stable branch, and the master is, well, our current stuff.
So
yes.
So you have like the release branch and then like a security branch of that's just fixes and improvements. Okay, so that's kind of a hybrid of the OpenBSD model and the FreeBSD model.
Yeah. We also plan to have a next release in half a year, Bitrig 1.1. But we have some big upcoming SMP changes that need proper testing, so I can't promise that we have it in half a year.
Sure. Well, cool. So what's the target use case you're looking at for Bitrig? Are you looking at like desktop servers or just power users in general, or anything more specific?
Well, the desktop market is huge, but that's not what Bitrig is aiming for. You need to invest lots of resources into graphical user interfaces and user experience, and that doesn't make sense, and our developers aren't experts in that.
Mhm.
So Bitrig is aiming for power users who are used to working in Unix environments. It works well as a desktop and is a very well server operating system, but you really have to know your way around the console.
Sure.
Personally, I would like to make it more user accessible, but we don't have really resources for that.
That makes sense.
But so your target is more servers and embedded, and then developers will use
Power
it on their
users.
laptop and so on. It won't. You're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, power users for the laptop, of course, but not a big, huge desktop market for everyone. That's
obviously
not reachable.
So do you're tracking updates that happen in the base OpenBSD?
Yep. We regularly sync the commits from OpenBSD. That means that we usually have all the stuff that OpenBSD does. At the same time, actually, the OpenBSD community has a look at what we're doing and occasionally picks up stuff from us, which is what we really appreciate.
Yeah, right. It works better if code flows in both directions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's good.
So what would be one of the best ways to get involved with the project? Do you guys have a list of what you're currently looking for?
We have two kinds of communication channels. One of them is IRC. We are on the OFTC IRC network, which is the same place as the Tor community is.
Okay.
There's a channel, Bitrig. It's easy to remember. And, well, that's, as I said, where we have every discussion, and everyone who wants to can just join. We also have two mailing lists, Tech and Source. One of them is for technical discussions, and the other one basically shows what we have done in Git.
Right.
Okay.
And we have some more information on our website, bitrig.org. So you can look that up and see how to talk to us.
Cool.
We look for more developers. We're only a small bench of. So if anyone listens and is interested in working with a friendly community, well, feel free to talk with us. We have plenty of ideas what one could implement and do, and we'd appreciate every user and every feedback.
Nice.
So do you need stuff other than developers as well, like documentation people or anything, translators?
Well, basically everything.
Rest.
We're only a small group, really. We have a few developers who know about UVM, about ARM, more like the kernel internals. And we appreciate everyone. There's lots one can do here.
Cool.
Oh, very cool.
Was there anything else you wanted to mention before we let you
go? I would really like to thank every developer and contributor who has made the Bitrig 1.0 release possible. I'm really honored to work with those gifted minds. And I would like to thank OpenBSD for the great project and for their work.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us this week, Patrick. We appreciate it.
Yes, I was going to ask, is Bitrig planning to come to some of the conferences like BSDCon or EuroBSDCon?
I would really like to, and I have a few of my developer friends. Well, we have ideas what to present, but it didn't work out yet. But we are planning to go to a few conferences.
Good. Look forward to seeing you.
Oh, very good. Well, yeah, maybe we can get some interviews in person next time.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Patrick. And that website, for those who were wondering, was bitrig.org, by the way. So go check them out. See if you can play with it and get involved. Okay, folks, before we go into the weekly news roundup, we, of course, want to mention the other sponsor at this time, which is iXsystems. And we got a new link to point you guys to. I guess the new FreeNAS 9.3 has landed. Yes. So an early Christmas present from the good folks over at iXsystems. And this is a big one. They've improved a lot in it. This one, they feature a simplified and reorganized web user interface, which is very nice.
Much easier to find things.
Support for Microsoft ODX and Windows 2012 clustering. better VMware integration, including VAAI
We
support,
talked a little bit
and
about those before. Those are the
yeah,
improvements for when you're using it as an iSCSI target to store your virtual
hmm
machines. It can
yep,
send certain command like clone this or copy this file or create this giant empty file instead of having
sure.
to actually issue those individual writes. It makes things go a lot faster.
Yeah, that's really cool. They've also added a new, more secure update system with rollback functionality. It's using like boot environments, I guess, very similar to what we
Yep.
do.
So that
So,
if your upgrade gets botched, you can always boot it off the old system and
yep,
so on without having to
yeah.
fiddle around with it.
That's right. That's right. Makes it easy. And of course, they've had hundreds of other little technology enhancements. And this is a great release, guys. So we'll have the link here, of course, and you can take a look at the full list of changes here. And of course, so there's a couple videos. There is a video on the changes, and then they have a link to Jordan Hubbard's FreeNAS State of the Union from a couple weeks back.
Yep. And they
Which, if you
also
missed
have
that, you may want to go take a look at it.
the FreeNAS instructor Linda Cately has
Oh yeah.
a video here with a more in-depth overview of the actual changes and walking
hmm
through that. And they also mentioned that they were glad to see a bunch of FreeNAS users out at MeetBSD. We saw a bunch of them. We
Nice.
saw the FreeNAS Mini, and we saw the FreeNAS Mini surviving having its hard drives pulled out and hit with a hammer.
It kept going till that last drive got yanked out, and even then, it kept going for a little while because of some cache.
Yeah, that was the fun part. ZFS
Yeah, I was like,
just keeps on going no matter what you do to
right?
it.
It's like, oh, I have no disk left. That's fine. I can still keep serving for a little
Yeah.
while longer. Don't worry about it.
I pre-read the file because I knew you were going to need it, so it's already in the ARC.
Yeah, it was
And
pretty
then,
cool.
oh, you're writing data? I'm just going to buffer that and wait for the disk to be ready.
So again, that URL that we mentioned every week, of course, is iXsystems.com/BSD Now. Go ahead, fill out the forum there. Let them know that we sent you, and get in touch with those guys there. They can hook you up with any kind of custom solution you guys are looking for. These guys are experts at open source, so that includes the BSDs, of course. They can do Linux. They can do a whole bunch of different things, and everything from a small FreeNAS Mini, which maybe I have my feet sitting on right now, or all the way up to your massive systems where we've kind of talked about like their 80 core systems they were building last year. And how many network cards did they shove into that one machine,
Like,
Alan?
was it like
24 NICs or something?
Yeah, some ridiculous number of 10 gigabit NICs, not just 1
Yeah,
gigabit
yeah.
NICs.
Yeah, so
Craziness.
obviously they can build pretty much anything, and of course the guys you talk to there are all engineers, so they're going to know exactly what you're talking about, and they're going to design the best solution that's going to fix whatever problem you specifically are trying to solve.
Yep, and they've solved every problem I've ever thrown at them.
Yep. So anyway, yep, go ahead and let the guys at iXsystems know, and let them know that we sent you. We would appreciate that.
Yep.
So let's head right on into the news roundup now, Alan.
Yes.
So first up, we have an infrastructure enhancement at New York Internet. So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that.
The FreeBSD cluster has a couple of locations. One of them is in California at ISC, another one at Yahoo, and then there's this one here at New York Internet, which is the East Coast rep. Glenn Barber, who's a full-time employee of the FreeBSD Foundation and the release engineer and part of the cluster admin team, he spent several days on site at the East Coast co-location back in July and then now again in November, racking and installing new servers that the FreeBSD Foundation had bought for the FreeBSD project. This hardware is essential to supporting the FreeBSD project. It does things like provide the FTP mirrors where people download the ISOs and the source and so on, the package mirrors where people download their packages from, the building infrastructure that builds the packages, the SVN mirror where people download the source code from, and various other things, as well as resources that can be used by the FreeBSD developers for various tasks, including the machines that they're lending to people to work on building packages for ARMs and MIPS, building the releases on segregated boxes. The FreeBSD update stuff all has to be done in a secure, separate environment on a separate machine, and lots of different testbed machines for developers to sign out and use for a while to work on stuff. So since July, they've bought 14 new machines that they've installed there at their hosting, which is provided by New York Internet, or NYI, in New Jersey. The servers were purchased with the end goal being a complete mirror of the primary site that's on the US West Coast. The newly added servers bring the machine count at NYI to 68.
Wow.
Yeah, so there are 68 machines just on the East Coast at that co-location.
Yeah.
But
that's quite a setup.
Yeah, so now the East Coast has a complete copy of everything that's on the West Coast instead of only some of the stuff. So that means that everything can stay up even if the entire West Coast 1 goes down for maintenance or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I like the pictures, though. Of course, they have
Yes.
pictures, so you can see what the front and back of the rack looks like, and very nice.
So they reorganized it all for redundancy. They have 2 machines that are just firewalls that each have 4 gigabit NICs. Both firewalls have direct connections to the switches of all 4 cabinets of their hardware and provide a
Mhm.
redundant uplink to each of the 4 switches, so you can reboot either firewall without losing any connectivity. Kind of like we were just talking about with the PF sync
Mhm.
stuff. And they've also added additional services, right?
Yep.
The 2 primary goals were to install and configure the recent shipment of machines and reconfigure the network topology behind the firewalls. Before many of the machines could be brought online, several changes needed to be made to the network. Now, each FreeBSD.org site further separates services behind the firewalls using VLANs, limiting each set of services provided within each VLAN into its own network rules and restrict firewall rules. And in order to properly allocate network space for the new machines, several of the VLANs needed to be redone and set up so they span the switches and so on. He said the most publicly disruptive part was reallocating the VLANs that contain the firewalls, but thanks to Peter Wem, there was no major service disruption aside from a planned simultaneous firewall reboot. And then, yes, lots of pictures. You can see he did a nice job racking them all up.
Mm-hmm. I know it always looks good when the cables are all nice and neat and tied well.
And you can see the iXsystems logos on each of the servers.
What? What do you know, huh? A little shameless advertising there. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, well, next up in the roundup, we have a neat article about the long tail end of MD5.
Yes.
So our friend Ted Unix, who's been on the show, gosh, has he been on once or twice now?
Just once, but he's
Just
given quite a few talks we've mentioned videos for as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of stuff out there, Ted. Keep up the
We've
good
mentioned
work.
his blog many times. He does a good job.
Yeah.
So like he says, everybody knows that MD5 is terrible. He goes a little further and says this is useless as ROT 13. Maybe not quite, but and that,
We're getting there, yeah.
and that everybody should be using, SHA 512 for like 20 years now and so on. But yet there are lots of usage sticking around for using MD5. And, why not simply convert those to a better hash function? He says, well, maybe it's not quite that easy. For example, TCP has the sequence numbers. And, originally it was just the ISS, and then you added 65536 to it. But it turns out that's not very unpredictable, and that caused some problems. So there was RFC 1948 defending against sequence number attacks. And, instead there's a single global counter that increments, but randomly offset by hashing the tuple of the source host and port and the destination host and port, instead of having to have a bunch of separate timers. And it says, what does RFC 1948 say about hashing algorithm? It says MD5 is a good choice, and that's why everybody used it. In 2010, the RFC was obsoleted by RFC 6528, which revised the algorithm recommendation to MD5 would be a good choice. It goes on to explain the rationale. So is it convertible? Yes. OpenBSD uses SHA-512 now instead of MD5. Is it necessary? Probably not. If you don't want MD5 to show up in a code rep, something has to change. Since ISNs are by definition secret, there's no interoperability concerns with changing the algorithm. So obviously for that particular one, there was no reason not to change it to SHA-512.
Yeah, he also looks like he takes a look at TCP MD5 and then of course MD5 auth.
Right. So the TCP MD5 one is specifically the way they protect BGP sessions, so that someone can't inject invalid announces and so on. So MD5 signatures on those to authenticate the packets were introduced with RFC 2385 and was later obsoleted by RFC 5925, which finds more options, but in practice, mitigation has been slow. There's some code in a branch of FreeBSD, for example, but it's not in the main line. So converting it would be hard. You can only replace MD5 if every peer replaces it at the same time. So that one's kind of hard. He says another choice is to use IPsec instead, but in places where MD5 signatures are used, they're being used because IPsec wasn't a viable option in the first place. And so, yeah, that one will be a lot harder to change.
Doesn't solve it. Yep.
For MD5-based authentication, quite a few protocols support, like CRAM MD5 and so on for like POP or IMAP for your email. One of the cool things about MD5 auth is that it is it's kind of zero knowledge proof, that the user knows the password. The protocol was designed back when everything was plain text, and there was some sense of providing plain text access to a POP mailbox because the SMTP connections were all plain text. The only secret was the user's password. Sending the MD5 with the password and a challenge announced prevented eavesdroppers from learning the password. It is, however, it also, however, prevented the server from learning the password. Okay, so that's not very interesting considering that the protocol only works if the server already knows the plain text of the password.
Sure.
But you'll never accidentally transmit your password to an imposter server, unlike most of the TLS wrapped, since the password send the password to the server, the protocols that way. So it says convertible, not really, but deletable, yes. Now that we have TLS, there's no reason to do that.
So don't need to do the work to change it to SHA-512.
And he says, from time to time, people try to breathe new life into this idea with the sort of client-side bcrypt proposals, but without going to a lot of work, more work than I've ever seen anyone do. It adds a lot of less security than one thinks when TLS already takes care of not only providing the encryption, but making sure that the remote end is actually who you expect it to be.
Sure.
So for content MD5, which is another HTTP thing, has anyone proposed a content SHA-512 replacement? There is an RFC 3230 discussing things like that, but it only brings to the table SHA-1, but also the 16-bit Unix sum utility. Although one could extend it ad hoc, a little rare in the wild anyway. So is it convertible? It's better to just replace it by using HTTPS to ensure the content wasn't changed as it was downloaded, rather than providing the checksum of the file before you send them the file in the header, and then them checking it afterwards. If you're using TLS, you can verify it as it comes in, kind of thing. And then two more left. MD5 crypt. So MD5 crypt is how we used to store passwords. Basically, do the MD5 of the password and a salt, and then you mix it up and basically do the MD5 100 times with different bits salted in it in different orders and so on. This still sees a lot of life in .ht password files and things like that. It wouldn't be so bad if the cost factor could be adjusted, right? Sadly, MD5 crypt is hard-coded with, I think, 100 rounds, not 1,000, but it's 100 or 1,000, something like that. But it limits its useful lifespan, right? Most systems, like the flexible crypt these days, allow you to adjust the difficulty, right? Like bcrypt has the cost factor, and so does SHA 256 crypt and 512 crypt, and everything newer basically means that you can adjust that cost factor so that as the algorithm gets older, you can turn it up to make it take the amount of time it used to take, right? When MD5 crypt was first introduced, doing it 100 times made it slow enough. But we had Pentiums back then. Now we have multiple cores and many gigahertz. And so, we need that number to be much higher now. So it was a mistake to make it not adjustable back then. So as far as converting it, he says, is it migratable? HTTP auth may never die, but handling authentication at the application layer brings its own different benefits. But in general, if the Apache library already supports, I think, some kind of SHA hash, but it's not crypt. I think the newer ones support SHA-256 script, but people have to stop finding old articles on how to set up HTTP password from the 90s and not use MD5, and then it'll go on. And lastly, he says for checksums, MD5 also landed in a few other places for non-cryptographic purposes. For example, OpenBSD's soft RAID checksums of its on-disk metadata are MD5. Migrating away would require rewriting everybody's disk to little benefit. Maybe someday we'll get to this, but it's a low priority. Specifically,
that sounds painful.
The newer hashes would be longer, and so it's like, how much room do you have in the header to fiddle around to do it, and backwards compatibility, and that one. In this case, since it's just a checksum to tell whether it's corrupt or not, it's not really security related. It's not really worth making the change.
Sure. Okay.
And there's actually an extra link in here. with some other places that people have found it.
Well, the link I think was Theo talking about
Yes.
no MD5 in the curl, not even close to being true.
Yeah, there was lots.
Right.
Apparently.
It is definitely still there.
Yep.
Okay, well, next up we have a DragonFly cheat sheet, which we have the link to. It's up on the DragonFly website. But if you've ever been thinking about trying out DragonFly BSD, this may make the transition a bit easier. So this is very helpful.
Quite a few
A user
tutorials
created.
we have here.
Yeah, the user created this cheat sheet on the website, which lists some of the common answers to beginner questions. Also features a walkthrough of the installer, some shell tips, and workarounds for various issues. So this is a great way to kind of walk you through getting your feet wet with a DragonFly BSD.
Also talks about setting up Golang, Wingo, Git graphical interface, and Agar. And then lots of different, looking at the different shelves, looking at the different tab completion stuff, partial previous command up key. So I don't know if you noticed, but like when you press up, you can go through commands you've done before. But if you type the first part of a command and then press up, you can search your history only for commands that start with the same thing. So if you have to go up 20 lines rather than pressing up 20 times, you can start typing a little bit and then go and find that one and so on. And lots of interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Even longer walkthroughs of like setting up the mate desktop and doing the install configuration, or a short one on doing enlightenment. So if you'd like to try running it on a workstation, you can do that as well. So very cool link. Check that out again if you want to take a look at some DragonFly BSD. And next up in the roundup, we have experiences with an OpenBSD laptop. So a lot of people seem to be interested in trying out BSD on their laptop, and this article talks about a user who did just that. So the article author got interested in OpenBSD mostly because of the security focus and the fact that it's not Linux. And in the blog post, he's going to go through some of the steps of how he researched, installed, configured, upgraded, and then finally actually started using it on his ThinkPad. And then he even gives us, as I mentioned, on a good place to learn more about BSD. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. Yeah, this is definitely fascinating. He's got a lot of good info in here on how he went about getting this set up. Looks like he was doing even did an upgrade guide from 5.5 to 5.6, how he did that
about
as well.
setting up a wireless, getting his desktop going the way he wanted. Power management to save some battery life.
Looks like he picked GNOME for the desktop environment, so that was... yeah. So this is definitely cool. So if you've been meaning to try OpenBSD, definitely throw it on a laptop too. This seems like a great way to get it tested out. Okay, so I think, was that our last article for the week here? Oh no, I have one more thing here, PC-BSD update. That's right, I threw this in at the end here. So just really quick, we have a link in the show notes here. We put a call for testing out for a new update system that we're working on, which should make the whole updating process a heck of a lot more reliable. We've really been pounding on this last week, trying to knock out all the last kinks, and the long and short of it is that it uses ZFS, which of course we use a lot of ZFS stuff nowadays, but it uses ZFS specifically for updating in that it creates a boot environment proactively now at the beginning of the update, does all the update in the boot environment, so you can be working and it's not changing anything on your running system. You can keep on, opening up Firefox and programs and whatnot while the upgrade's going on in the background. And when it's finished, all you got to do is reboot. It'll make that boot environment the default, and you'll boot right into your newly updated system, of course, with previous boot environments there for what you were just running a moment ago. So please test this out. We'd like people to try this. If we can work out all the bugs and kinks, this is what's going to allow us to start building current images as well. We really want to get some FreeBSD head up and running here, and maybe do like monthly updates of that. Yeah, I want it too, because it's like that's where exciting stuff's happening, and that's where Haswell support will land first. And yeah, so we want to get those out and running. And in order to do that, the reason we've held off so long from doing this is we didn't have a reliable way to update. Like, oh, well, you need a whole new package set. Oh, well, FreeBSD update's got to do a full upgrade. And how do we do that? How do we make it seamless? And the goal of this update system is to make it so transparent that we just turn on updating by default. And it just does it in the background, and all you see is a ping on your tray saying, oh, you can reboot now. Your update's already been applied.
Yeah, and when you
reboot and you're up and running.
The new one will be the default in your grub menu, and you can always come back to this one if that doesn't work.
Yeah, you can always come back. But yeah, we want to make it that painless and that transparent. So please test this out.
That also has the advantage of you can install the update, and if you don't reboot right away, your system is in an inconsistent state where you have newer binaries and not a newer kernel yet because you haven't rebooted and so on. So that also has other advantages, like being able to...
Yeah, you won't have that because your running system never gets touched. The
Exactly.
current boot environment you're on, like the kernel doesn't get replaced. You're never in that inconsistent state. And when you reboot, everything's just there. So yeah, this has definitely got some advantages. A little bit slower because it has to prep the other environment, but because it's doing it in the background, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, no problem. Like I can work all day and just reboot when I'm done working at the end of the day, like when I'm ready to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
You-
it's very nice. And we've tested it for doing upgrades from 10.0 to 10.1 primarily, and then, of course, package upgrades and security updates and all that. In addition, we do want to mention quickly, we've been moving all of our GUI utilities to Qt5 or Qt5. So that's now up in the Edge repo. So if people want to test that or developers want to take a look at it, please let us know if you find any issues so we can prep that for our next quarterly update in a couple months.
That's supposed to scale the windows and text and stuff better for high resolution
It does.
and stuff, right?
Yeah, and the theme, I mean, the first thing you'll notice is the theming looks different and it just looks nicer. It's a little bit more modern, and we've noticed the speed improvement too.
Nice.
Qt 5 is just quicker for, whatever reasons. They've done some optimization there and it is quite a bit faster. And yeah, we've been very pleased with it so far. So that just went out this morning actually. So this is very fresh stuff. So if you'd like to take a look, and if you're on the Edge repo, go ahead and update all your packages there or run the new update system that I just mentioned. We have the link here on how you can grab that. Start testing that out. Let us know what you find. Okay, we're back with time to do our feedback section, guys. So what have you sent in this week? We're going to start with Chris, appropriately named, who has a question about bridging. So go ahead and I'll let you read this one here, Alan.
In version 10 of FreeBSD, he's trying to set up a bridge that handles traffic incoming from a Cisco router with sub interfaces. It's a router on a stick. He says he wants the BSD box to be his managed switch. So he wants the STGE0 interface to be his trunk port in Cisco speak. Finally, he wants to connect a bunch of 100 meg switches to the XL0, BGE0, and STGE1 ports, wherein he's facilitating the VLANs. He says this is purely a home project for his own learning experience. He thinks BSD is awesome, and what he's trying to consider is an implementation plan, and thanks to pointers in the right direction. So he provided a handy graphic. So you can see his internet comes in, and it gets split up into 3 VLANs, and those are VLAN interfaces on his FreeBSD machine. And then he's got, and he wants to bridge those to the VLANs on the external stuff that's going to the switches. Now, I guess my question here is if his switches that are connected to those external NICs actually support VLANs, and what devices he's connecting behind them. Because what he probably wants to do is not tag the packets on the XL0, BGE0, and STEG1 interfaces. Right, so basically, the way he's got it now, the packets are going to go out to his 100 megabit switches tagged. And if those don't get untagged, then the NIC in the machine at the very end of the connection, if it doesn't understand VLANs, if it's not in VLAN 1, it doesn't see the packet. Or more importantly, it replies without a VLAN tag when it sends a packet out. And so it ends up on the XL0 interface, not the XL0:110 interface. And so it never happens. Right? So it never gets received on the interface where you expect it. So most likely, he shows his stuff at the bottom there where he's creating the VLANs, and that's all right on the STG side. But what I imagine what you want to do is actually create separate bridges, right? Because if you got the 3 separate VLANs, you don't want them to be bridged together anyway, right? I've seen here even in his diagram, he calls bridge 1, bridge 2, and bridge 3. So the problem seems to be the way he's setting up his bridges. So what I would recommend here is to your list of cloned underscore interfaces, add bridge 1, 2, and 3, and then if config bridge 1, add m, I guess VLAN 10 and XL0, and then if config underscore bridge 2 is add m, VLAN 20 and BGE0, and then if config underscore bridge 3 equals add m, VLAN 30 and STEG1. rather than setting that sysctl like he's done, because that's creating one big bridge out of all of it, and that's not going to be what he wants. So that'll be the biggest thing there, is that you'll want to create the 3 separate bridges and configure them with the 2 pairs of interfaces each, and then that should get you what you want. And specifically, you don't actually want to have the VLANs existing on the side that goes out into your internal network, because I'm assuming your 100 megabit switches and your end clients are not actually configured to deal with the VLANs. Now, if you have a managed switch, specifically he wants FreeBSD to be the managed switch, so I'm assuming his 100 megabit switches aren't managed. Without the switch being able to untag the packets, the end clients aren't seeing them, and without them being able to tag the packets on the way back in, they're not going to show up on the right interface internally. So for your 3 interfaces that go out to your internal network, I would do no VLANs on them at all, and then just using the bridge, only connect them to the right VLAN, and the traffic won't be able to go across anyway. And
Cool.
that should solve the problem. So instead of using the sysctl net.link.ether.bridge config, create the 3 cloned interfaces, bridge 1, 2, and 3, or whatever you want to call them, or bridge 10, 20, and 30 if that's what you want to do, and then just do add m for add member to the two interfaces that you want to have in each bridge, which like he has here will be his VLAN 10 and his XL0, VLAN 20 and BGE0, and VLAN 30 and STGE1. And that should solve all of the problems.
Excuse me. Cool. Okay. Well, next up we have AJ, who has a question about PC-BSD updates, and I mentioned this a moment ago, but he says, I'd like to hear you speak on your shows about the mess upgrading PC-BSD and what you should do to update. He said, granted, this last update was a bit more problematic than in the past, but other updates have been unpleasant too. I'm constantly having to fix my friends and family's computer because of problems updating. I don't have the time. Well, neither do I. Same thing. He said, I had to reinstall 5 computers from scratch. Ouch. Well, sorry about that. He said, I'd like to know the way you all update PC-BSD from the command prompt. He said, the GUI's okay, but there's a little feedback, and he wants to know what's occurring. He said, great show. Glad you're all sticking to it. So, AJ, I actually responded to you offline, but part of this email and some of the same experiences we had was we'd been doing updates like with package commands directly and then trying to fix conflicts, and it was just getting very time-consuming and tedious and not automated enough. My folks run PC-BSD, for example, so it's not something I felt comfortable even having them do. I'd have to go and actually sit and, oh, that's right, GNOME changed. I got to remove that and change this, fix this conflict and whatnot. So part of what we mentioned a little earlier in the roundup was that we have a new updating system that we developed in the last couple weeks, and if you'd like to try it, this will hopefully solve all these issues. I've used it here on our 5 systems, and it works beautifully so far. So this is what we're hoping to switch to, and it's just a command line utility, gives you all the feedback, keeps logs of everything that happened, but because the updates are done in the background in a boot environment, you don't have to worry about it hosing anything that's on your currently running system, and it does everything in a clean way and gets rid of package conflicts entirely. So I'm really looking forward to using it, and hopefully we're just going to start turning it on by default, so it just does updates whenever you schedule it to do them. So yeah, please let us know, and this is something we want to solve because it annoys me too, and I've not been happy with upgrading in the past. So this should make it easier for us to do current and stable images as well. So test it from that perspective as well, because we'd like to get those images rolling here soon.
Cool.
Okay, next up is Dan, so I'll let you take this one away.
This is gentleman. I've been listening to you guys on and off for the past 6 months or so. He enjoys hearing from the various contributors that you interview, and he also enjoys hearing about the BSD conferences. Yes, that's my favorite part too. You guys are also my primary go-to source when looking for how-tos for BSD. He says he's a Windows user by trade, and it's fun learning about BSD. The ZFS and EasyJail tutorials have been great help on his journey. He loves EasyJails for giving him the ability to just spin up a clean install, poke around on it, install some packages, mess around with it, and then if it doesn't work, you can just blow it away. Or as a learning experience, you can blow it away and then do it again. And once you can do it repeatably, then you actually know how to do it, and you're not just kind of a fluke. Right? That's the way I learned to do some of the stuff, was document it as you're doing it, and then blow it all away and do it again using only what's in the documentation. And if you had to do anything,
With my notes, was
yeah,
this sufficient?
if I had to do anything that I didn't have written down, obviously my notes need to be improved.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, and so he just repeats
Yeah.
until he gets the install and the settings just right, all without having to cause any fuss on the host system. Yes, I love jails for that. I almost run everything in a separate jail, because the other nice thing is the containerization. I have a lot of servers. Jails mean I can just stop it, pick it up, move it onto a different server, and start it again, and it'll just work. And it solves a lot of problems that way. He says he looks forward to eventually experimenting with Beehive to make a test bed for other OSs and so on. And it works for a lot of the same stuff. If you want to test different kernels and stuff like that, or more extensive stuff, or virtualized networking that's just easier to do on a whole system than in a jail, that's also very useful. He says, while program installs aren't as easy as Windows, he would like to say that it's greatly enjoyed the new package system and the ports. He says it's much better than the previous systems he's tried to muddle through. And he says,
Mm-hmm.
please keep up the good work, and thank you for your time and all the help.
Oh, very cool. Well, thank you, Dan.
And then Jeff wrote in with a follow-up. He says he was
Mhm.
watching BSD Now episode 66 on YouTube. Keep up the great show. He says he's recently built a free NAS for himself, and now one of his for the family as a Christmas present. He says he's been researching storage/ZFS in general and for quite a while now. He says, in reference to Robert's mail-in, did you mention something called mullet nat? What? When talking about having hard drives attached to two LSI controllers. Okay, that was multipath. Not that multipath. He says, can you expand on this? How are these 32 drives connected to two ports? I could not find any information about this. And he says he has a Rocket RAID card that has two 8087s and assumes I can only attach 4 drives per port. So that's correct. You can only connect 4 drives for each 8087 port. So the way the server I have with the 36 drives is you got 24 drives in the front and 12 drives in the back. And there's basically what's called a SAS expander. So there's almost a motherboard-like thing that connects to the 24 drives, and it provides two 8087 ports, the SFF 8087 ports. And then on the back, there's a similar thing where the 12 drives are all connected, and it provides 2 more ports. So so if I plugged an LSI controller, one of its 8087 ports in and then into the front, it now sees all 24 of those hard drives through that one 4-channel port. And obviously, you only have as much bandwidth as 4 channels, but that's a lot with a 6G per second controller. So what it does is the one controller has one cable that connects to the front 24 drives and one cable that connects to the back 24 drives. Then the second controller has one cable to the front and one cable to the back. So that means if either of those controllers goes out, the other controller still sees every one of the drives. And then you can, depending on your configuration, you can also do it where the 2 ports on one controller are connected to the 2 ports at the front, and you get more bandwidth that way. And you can control with the multipath. You can set it up to do different things. Like there's active, where it'll use both copies of the drive that it sees to talk to the thing. So it'll read from the drive via one controller and from the other controller. Although with spinning hard drives, that tends to hurt performance because you're sending more IOPS, and a spinning drive can't do very many. Although for an SSD, it might actually be useful. You can also do read-write mode, where all the reads will go through one controller, but all the writes will go through a different one or something. And you can also do active-passive, where it'll always use the one controller for the one and only use the second one for backup. So I have mine set so every other drive is on the opposite controller, so that the load gets split between them. But yeah, so basically to be able to do it, you need the SAS expander, which usually is part of the chassis in the server. And you often don't see those in servers that don't support at least 12 or more hard drives, since you don't need it. Right? If you have 8 drives in the server, then it'll just give you the 2 8087 ports you connected to your Rocket RAID card, and you're good to go. But if, for example, my server, you have 24 drives in the front of it, it uses an expander to be able to connect all those drives to the LSI. Like if you read the stats for your Rocket RAID, I don't know about that one in particular, but for my LSI controller, I think it supports 127 or 256 hard drives or something like that if you use a series of expanders for it. But yeah, if you don't have an expander, then you're limited to the 4 drives on each of the 2 ports.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alan. Well, next up, we have some mailing list gold for you guys this week. So first up is in the OpenBSD tech mailing list, and it's about getting a faster random number implementation. And this is actually quite good, but he basically goes through and replaces random with just return 4.
So he's replying to the actual patch that changed it to return a stronger random number. And then
people are saying it was slow, right?
Then somebody else proposed, he says, I propose instead returning just 4 decided by a random dice roll. And he says over 440% faster, and cites the obligatory XKCD in this case.
Oh, he actually compiled and ran the benchmarks to prove it. So indeed, it is much faster. That's pretty cool. Okay, so the next one, this was actually, I think he was serious when he was talking about this, but he's looking into PF on FreeBSD and was surprised, that we have multi-threaded support for it, and that's what's keeping us from being brought up to date with OpenBSD version because they've diverged too much. So he was, I guess the suggestion here is, why don't we just remove all the multi-threaded support and roll back to the older version of PF in FreeBSD and then leave it that way until somebody gets around to fixing it. I don't know, Alan. What do you think about that?
Well, it depends. Are you trying to send a gigabit of traffic through it, or more than a gigabit of traffic? Because you can't do that on one core, really.
Yeah. But no, it's interesting proposal. It came up. There's some good responses on the threads here as well. You'll want to take a look at here.
I think the biggest, specifically this is at the bottom. I am not a coder, but my advice is roll back PF and then try to upgrade it. It's like it doesn't work quite that easily, right? It's not like without the multi-threading patch, the version of PF and FreeBSD wasn't just a copy and paste from OpenBSD, right? A lot of stuff had to be changed as it was. And so it's not like just it's not really possible to just rip out the changes we did. And even if it was, doing that wouldn't just mean that immediately we could the next day import the newest version from FreeBSD.
We can import it,
It doesn't would not really be pleasant. Work that way.
Yeah.
Sadly, it would be great if it did work that way, but it doesn't.
Yeah, not quite that easy. And next one's from Jim Thompson, we know, who over at Netgate, who does the PF Sense stuff, and it's a mailing list post here about other PF stuff here. Did you read through this all this one, Alan?
It's relatively long. So is this the same guy posting more?
Well, he's talking about the direction of PF and stuff.
Yeah, so here we have Jim Thompson's response. He says, you're kind of missing the point here. The code base was forked, and it's unlikely that anyone who is working on it or in a position to directly work on it believes that the correct course of action is to reverse at this point. This is there's an there's an architecture available called pfill, which will allow you or someone you find to do the work to bring the current PF from OpenBSD to work on FreeBSD. Given this, I'm left to ask why you continue to pound the desk with demands that there is a path to which you can accomplish your goal. The other question, of course, is to ask what is lacking in FreeBSD that OpenBSD has that if you want the one from OpenBSD so bad, go use OpenBSD.
Sure. Well, he also says, though, one of the frustrating things about people saying, well, we don't want multi-core support because we're going to do it right because FreeBSD doesn't do it right.
Yeah.
And Jim says this reason is somehow lacking. He said OpenBSD may grow proper multi-core support, but that's of little concern to the FreeBSD project. It took FreeBSD years to get proper multi-core support, and I doubt OpenBSD gets there any faster, nor have they started. Yeah, he kind of takes some to task on that. But yeah, interesting post here. You might want to read through some of these. We got a few of them related to PF in this week's mailing list gold.
So specifically, he says the selling points are A, that his assertion that we should just update and throw away our work or whatever is not new. It's not the first person to have suggested this. B, there's work continuing and people are working on PF on FreeBSD. And see, there's likely more low-hanging fruit and stuff people can fix, and he links to some mailing list stuff for that as well. It says OpenBSD will eventually get multi-core. Well, eventually can mean a lot of things.
Sure.
And there are quite a few different goals about different things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's an interesting discussion. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the next one we have here about violating standards?
Yes, well, I think this is violating the way POSIX does random because. So he says the log message, this changes rand, random, dran 48, lran 48, mran 48, sran 48 to
We have a lot
return
of rand
strong
48s.
random numbers by default using arc4random as a source. So it's pretty funny if you call rand, it's calling arc4 random, which isn't actually arc4 anymore. And so
Yeah, go
all
figure.
these old function names are all replaced, are all now returning new random instead. Parameters to the seeding function are just ignored, and the subsystems remain in strong random mode. If you wish to standardize deterministic mode, call srand. Sorry.
Well, I think the funny part of this one is the very last line here.
This violates POSIX and C89, which violates best practices in the century.
Okay.
Yeah. It says this is verified as a good roadmap forward by auditing 8,800 pieces of software. Roughly 60 pieces of software will need adaptation to request the deterministic mode rather than the not deterministic mode. It says
Nice.
Yeah. So they tested this the change of switching all the old C random functions to return strong random numbers instead of the not. And out of the 8,800 ports in the port tree, only 60 will need changes because they actually depend on returning not very random numbers. Seeding with the same seed to actually return the same random number every time, which is usually not what you want. That's like one of the first things you learn when you're writing programs in like BASIC or C or Visual Basic or whatever. It's like when you ask for a random number, every time you run your program, you get the same sequence of random numbers unless you seed it with something. Yeah, so apparently out of the port tree, there are 60 programs that depend on that. But in the end, they find that violating the standard and doing it their way is actually better. Because the standard C89 is from 1989, and so what was good enough random back then is not really...
not quite the same today.
In the second post they talking about, they got the number of ports affected down to 41. This is generally these are doing reseeding for reproducible effects during benchmarking. Further analysis may show some of these ports do not need deterministic mode, but if there's any doubt, they can be mindlessly modified as described below.
Sure. Okay, so next up, I guess asking about systemd here.
I think this is a thread about the OpenBSD trademark policy. It says, if running a command after installing it will make your system free enough, what is the need for a fork? I think that if you publish a web page with the information, the OpenBSD community would not take that as an... I'm not sure the content. What are they talking about here?
Well, they're talking about a one command option to avoid or drop systemd. So like a command to get rid of the blobs.
So the firmware blobs are not running on the system, but on the device. Why do you want to create just a script to remove these files if you want? This is somebody forking or proposing forking OpenBSD just to remove the binary blobs or something. I'm not sure.
Or probably to add them or something.
The person in question says, I'm in the middle of leaving Debian after 15 years due to the systemd affair. And as you might guess, it has not been very easy. I have enough personal systems and experience invested to leave Debian only for a tantrum. But there is no easy way to install a new system and avoid systemd. And I guess this becomes worse over time. I had a one command option to avoid or drop systemd. He might not be here. And I guess the question is, if it was that easy, then
he would have stuck with it.
But is it worth having this argument is it the same thing if it's that easy to just remove it? Right?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, cool. Well, thank you, Alan. I appreciate that. And as we wrap up the show this week, of course, we want to remind you guys to send in your questions, comments, show ideas, or topics to feedback@bsdnow.tv. No questions too big or too small, so don't be afraid to get in touch with us. Of course, you can watch live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 UTC. And this will be our last reminder this week, guys. So just like we asked during the interviews, we're asking viewers and listeners how you first got into BSD. So email us your story to that feedback@bsdnow.tv address, either as a written or a video version, and we'll read and play some of them in our Christmas episode. So you got until next Wednesday to get those in, so please try and do it now. And of course, we'd especially love more video submissions. We think that would be
we're
cool.
very much looking forward to that. So yes, please record a video, send it in quickly.
We'll be recording all that this time next week. So yeah, try and get those in to us this weekend at the latest if you can. But you got till next Wednesday, so shoot them on over. So we thank you guys so much for being with us on the show this week, and we look forward to seeing you guys same time next week.